Welcome everybody to the June meeting of the Hort Horticultural Society, and we will be doing our plant forum today at 6:30, which is right about now. Actually, we're a little late, and then we will be having Sula Vanderplank a little else about fog in the studies of fog and how plants react to fog and how we can use it to our advantage in our area. So that'll be good. That's at 7. So welcome everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Judy, Sean, Connie, Bart, Dave, Beryl, Robbie, and Mark. Thank you guys for sharing your gardens with us. We're all anxious to see everything, which is always fun to see what's happening in other people's gardens so we can get ideas and see if we want to perhaps add that to our garden. I get to go first because I got my slides in first. So I have in my very dry front, now it's a little slope down to the street. I have the Monodella villosa franciscana, Russian River, and I have it in 2 spots. One's a little drier. This one on the left is kind of hidden behind a rock, so it kind of stretches up, but it looks more lush than the one that's on the dry hillside, as you can see on the right. But this is the Coyote Mint, and it has really fragrant foliage and takes really hot sun out in its natural habitat. It's blooming right now. Of course, we haven't had rain in forever, so it is surviving and doing well. And so pretty much harsh conditions it can take. Full sun, probably take a little bit of shade too if you have that. So I got this bromeliad from my friend Tosh, and I have no idea what it is. I'm kind of guessing a Bilbergia. If anybody knows, please jump in. And this tub on the left, and it bloomed. Oh, it's starting to fade now, but it was really showy with the red, and then as it merged, the purple came out beyond that. Anybody have any ideas on type or what it is, perhaps? Or no?
Seems like a Bilbergia, but I don't know which one.
Yeah, it looks like a Bilbergia.
Okay, good. Thanks for that confirmation. Nobody knows the type though, or the.
Is the flower relatively short? Is the flower relatively short-lived? How long do the flowers last, roughly?
Well, from the starting of the red, it's probably been a month.
Oh, okay. Because most Bilbergia flowers, that's about as long as they last. Most other bromeliads, the flowers last much longer. But Bilbergias tend to be shorter-lived flowers. But it does look like a Bilbergia.
Okay, it's really striking with the bright red and the purple contrast.
I don't think it's Bilbergia.
No,
What do you think, Charlotte?
It might be an acmea or something like that. The flowers don't look right for Bilbergia because they're more tear-shaped.
Yeah, I agree. The red bracts look like Bilbergia, but the flowers are a little different. So it might even be a hybrid. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah. Have the little spiny edges though.
I was thinking an acmea as well.
Yeah.
Okay. I will do more research then. Okay, thank you for that. And then Bart helped me with this idea. I thought for years I had Brodea idemea, and I was showing, Bart came over to deliver something one day, and I go, and I was asking about the foliage, what that foliage could be with the broad leaf, and I go, it looks like Brodea idemea. I thought that's what it was. And so that one really bloomed. I sent that to him, and he said it was Phaedranus species, and he thought it was probably dubia, which I think is probably the most common version. But it's tough as nails. It's kind of by that one Monodella, and it you can see how dry it is. It doesn't get much water, but it's supposed to flower after a rain, but of course it hasn't rained in quite some time, so I don't know what that's all about, but it pretty much seems to be consistent with blooming this time of year. And it's evidently frost tender, but I haven't had any problem with it. Obviously, it's on a slope, so, but it's got a color in the heat hot spot there.
Ellen, has it naturalized at all? Have you know, has it spread at all in the time you've had it?
Not a whole, you mean as far as going into a different spot as far as a,
Yeah, we're sending out, you know, bulbils or anything like just, you know, spreading it all.
I haven't seen that. It's supposed to do, get a bigger clump. I'm not sure, it hasn't really reseeded itself anywhere. But I think probably a bigger clump than it originally was. I can't
Yeah,
even.
I was thinking if the clump has spread.
I haven't noticed really. Yeah, no. Anyway, I don't know where I got it. And my hydrangea quercifolia was blooming, and these little bees was zipping around it. And over on the left, he kind of, well, it got me looking at it a little closer. That's one nice thing about the plant form is you look at your plants a little closer. And this little bee was kind of nestling in between the sterile flowers. And then underneath, as you can see on the second thing, he's devouring or whatever, pollinating down below. And then you can see on the far right where there's all these fertile flowers underneath the sterile bract flowers. So I looked at one of those, one of the regular big leaf hydrangeas, and I didn't see any fertile flowers underneath those. Do they have fertile flowers? I don't know.
Generally not. I mean, if they do, then they're the lace cap types or the just species
Accent.
types without
How do they propagate them? They just
cuttings.
phenomenally.
Cuttings. The big mop head ones are strictly horticultural.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Anyway, I love it for the fall color. It gets really beautiful fall color, and that's kind of why I bought it. Okay, so Judy, are you here?
This is the plant on the right is one I was excited about because I got it last year, and it's New America gracilis. And as Ellen says, it's called Apostles Iris or Walking Iris. The Apostles Iris, because evidently it has 12 leaves when it blooms, and the 12 apostles. So I didn't get a chance to sniff it. It wasn't particularly long-lived, but the one on the left is one I've had for a number of years, which is New America Cerulea. Much larger plant. The flowers probably twice as big. The leaves are probably twice as high, at least 5 feet tall. And as she says, this is from South and Central America. It's in the Iridaceae family, and it has a perennial rhizome, and it stays evergreen. So the gracilis seems to bloom earlier. The Cerulea is usually in bloom more in July. I lucked out in terms of where I went ahead and placed them. They like dappled shade. They like warmth. They like regular water, which is hard to get in my garden. But as of December 2019, the status of this plant name is under investigation. They're thinking about going ahead and adding it to Trimesia, which is another bulb I'm not particularly familiar with. The gracilis is distinguished from other ones, other New Americas, in that it bears flowers on very long or gracile, which is where it gets its name, peduncles, and the pedicels are very long. I got this at the San Mateo Arboretum, and this is the first time I've gotten bloom. It seems to bloom earlier, but and seems to be, the flowers seem to be shorter lived. But I thought it was pretty cool because it was the white petals.
Judy, I have something that looks very similar to that. That's a different species.
Mortiana?
Yeah, Northiana.
Yeah.
Because it's got that your image on the right with all the brown markings and the yellow background
Mm-hmm.
make me think that it very likely could be Northiana as well. My Northianas are all in flower right now, or were in the last week.
Wow.
Each one, the flower lasted just one day.
Right.
And they are lightly fragrant, and mine are short, only about 8 inches tall, maybe.
What? Oh, this
The
is 2
flowers,
feet.
but 2 feet?
Yeah.
No, mine's much, much, much smaller than that.
Wow.
But the flowers are huge.
Oh, I thought these flowers were awfully small, kind of puny compared to the Cerulea. It came to me as gracillus, but I was actually looking at the Pacific Bulb Society site and trying to decide whether it could be Nortiana. But maybe next year if it stays well, but it really grew tall this year. I
Huh.
mean, 2 feet. It's 2 feet easily.
And when these plants reproduce, I've seen these little, I guess, plantlets you would call them. Are those plantlets from fertilized seeds that develop, or are they vegetative clones of the mother plant?
Strictly vegetative clones.
I'm guessing so, yeah, because there were some little kind of starts right next to it, and they looked like they were just right off of the rhizome. The rhizome kind of decided to split a little bit and send out little pups.
Oh, yeah. Well, they also, it's why they're called walking iris. It's that they do
Right.
plantless up where the flowers are. And
Yeah.
whenever they touch the ground, they'll root.
Yeah. But
They're
these were really
easy to
close in
share.
though. Yeah, these were really close in though. They weren't far. They weren't like a foot away or anything like that.
Huh.
You have a crawling iris, I think.
Thank you, Josh. It's okay. It's okay. It's good for me. It's good for my garden. Okay. Oh, this is one that I really liked. I got this when I was at Western Hills when they had their anniversary, and what's his name? Sean brought them down from Sistus Nursery up in is it Portland?
Yeah, they're there.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a larger flowered selection of Microphyllus, and it's good for smaller gardens. I just put it in the ground last year, and it's about a foot to maybe 15 inches tall, and it's got part shade, but it is very fragrant. And you can see that there's a tag that I didn't realize that we had drought tolerant Philadelphus.
Yeah, and actually that label is wrong.
Oh, it is.
It's actually not a Rancho Santa Ana thing. It's Nevin Smith
Oh, okay.
of Suncrest Nursery.
Okay.
He grew up from seed from the woman collector from Arizona, New Mexico. I forget her name right now. And then this one was selected. Philadelphus Microphyllus is from sort of the eastern desert mountain ranges of Southern California and through other parts of the Southwest. It's been used extensively in hybridization because of its powerful fragrance. The really cool thing about this particular one is that usually Microphyllus is very shy blooming.
Oh.
And this one is not. We did have a beautiful one at Rancho, and that's probably where Sean got it from Rancho, from when I was there. And that our plant was in the ground for years and never got taller than about 2 feet.
Oh, okay.
It's a
Because
delightful little plant for a garden.
Because it says it's supposed to grow to 6 by 6.
No, nowhere near.
Wow.
Especially if it's grown fairly dry. It does like some summer water. I mean, if you think about it, the eastern desert ranges get those occasional summer monsoons, and that here at the Botanic Garden, we have some fairly recent as well as old collections from the Clark Mountains in particular, and they grow pretty much in shaded limestone canyons, and where they do get an occasional summer water, but they're not in full blasting sun. The plant that we had at Rancho was pretty much in full sun, but it did get some water.
And it was 2 by 2, you said?
Yeah, if that. It was a really nice, very dense, small plant.
And how big were the flowers, would you say?
Like you have there, about the size of a big fingernail.
Like not like about an inch?
If that.
Really? These were pretty good, at least an inch actually. Yeah, the information that I got though said that it's supposed to be from the slopes of Southern Cal and the Southwest. And I don't know, it's a late spring bloomer, which is about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
most of the Philadelphus are in flower right now.
Oh, I was gonna say my Lewisii is long past, about a month past.
Really? Our
Yeah.
Lewisii are in full bloom right now, and they're gigantic.
Yeah, no, it bloomed very well, but it bloomed about a month ago.
Huh.
I was up by Groveland this last weekend, and I was thrilled to see a Philadelphus in full bloom above
Oh,
rainbow pools on the South Fork of the.
oh yeah.
And that was fun to see.
So is Microphyllus available commercially in any number? I mean, I'm just wondering if people could use this where they would normally use like cistus. Could this be substituted for a native plant?
Would that be too hot, cistus?
Yeah,
Rose?
it wouldn't take cistus-like conditions, because cistus usually are, hot, dry slopes. This would want more dappled shade to full sun in the morning, not a problem. It's fairly adaptable though. And again, it's much smaller than pretty much any cistus.
That's interesting because the information Ellen found said it also is like 4 or 5 feet tall and wide.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
you're saying it really only goes to
Even ours
feet?
in the Botanic Garden here, our species collections aren't much bigger than 2 feet-ish.
wow. Mine's is about 2
Again.
feet now.
Really?
Yeah.
And how old is it? Maybe desert snow is a little bigger growing.
Well, it's definitely bigger flowered. And again, and more profuse blooming. I think ours haven't produced even any flower buds yet this year.
Wow.
But again, if they're on the same schedule as our other Philadelphus, maybe that means they'll flower in the middle of July.
Okay. Anyway, it has a very nice fragrance. I did enjoy it.
Yeah, and actually, I have been looking for that plant, that cultivar, for a couple of years now and haven't been able to find it anywhere. Really good to know that you've got one.
Yeah, somebody else got one too. I'm trying to think if it was Lorena or Shay. We were there at the same time, but I wonder if they're sending any to Western Hills.
Don't know.
Like I said, that's where I got it.
Yeah, huh.
But it was from Cistus Nursery, right?
Well, I was told by Sean that he'd brought them down from Oregon. I was thinking like, why would they be growing in Oregon? I mean, if it's a kind of a desert variety, I wouldn't expect it would have been very happy up there.
It's pretty hardy, as far as I know.
Okay.
And again, it has been used in breeding programs all over the world with Philadelphus because of its powerful scent.
That's great. So now I have 3. I have Bellatois and I have Lewisii and I have this one. So we'll have a contest to see who's most fragrant. All right, next. Oh yeah, this is from Lorena Gorchet, and I see she's in the meeting, but she gave me the seeds for this. It kind of wanders around I remember in her garden here, but it's really quite interesting. The flower is a little bud. It's also known as a white-veined Dutchman's pipe flower. And it's from Argentina, Paraguay, and southern Brazil. And the notation when I found it online said that they thought the flowers resembled elephant trunks. I didn't quite get that one. But it does bloom in the summer. It grows like a 3-foot vine, and it is winter deciduous and is hardy in my garden, so down to zone 7. Needs light, but not a lot of direct sunlight. And it does need regular water. It's near the spigot, which is why it lucks out. And reseeds lightly, not badly. So I've read that the flowers resemble poisonous caterpillars in coloration, so that it's not attractive to bugs, and that it is a host for the blue pipevine swallowtail butterfly. Does anyone know about that?
I know that our local pipevine swallowtail butterflies have used this in my garden in Point Richmond.
Okay.
I find this plant to be a pest.
Really?
Really?
Yes.
You may be overwatering, maybe. I don't water much.
It comes up in other pots from seed.
Really?
and my garden in Southern California, it was weedy there too. I didn't even intend to bring it north. It
Oh,
just
wow.
came along in some pots unnoticed.
Huh.
Does it climb or does it stay on the ground?
If you give it something, it'll climb, but I mostly let it kind of wander in the ground.
Yeah, it doesn't get very tall. It has beautiful foliage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our native pipevine swallowtail recognizes it as a host plant for that butterfly also.
Yeah, I can't say whether they're successful, but I know I've found young caterpillars on this plant in my garden. I don't have Californica, and I really didn't want to have this one. I also have Chilensis, and they also ate a lot of the Chilensis.
Wow.
I don't know where my picture is, but it bloomed. It's up here in Oregon and it wintered over in a container. So it's pretty hardy.
Yeah. It's outdoors in a fairly cool part of my yard, but I like the flowers. They're just the oddest looking things.
Between the flowers and the foliage, I'm sold.
What's
Yeah.
the seed,
And the
Mark?
pipevine butterflies like it.
Yeah, even better. Shall I save you some seeds, Mark?
Definitely,
Okay.
please.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
could save you some too, whether I want them or not.
I won't hold it against either of you.
That's right. I give them with a warning, they can be a little invasive, but they don't really reseed much for me.
I wouldn't mind a few seeds, Bart. I have some spaces that nothing will grow. Sean, probably this is going to be, we have 3 minutes until Sula comes on. So probably we'll cut off there and then continue the rest of them afterwards, if that's all right with everybody.
Okay, well, this is a little mini cymbidium that I got from a friend on social media. I admired it and asked him where he got it. Apparently a friend gave it to him after seeing it among the hundreds of Trader Joe's offerings. So it was kind of random, thing that happened, that it has these variegated leaves. They're lightly variegated. It's nothing that would, draw you from across the garden or anything, but, and it has green flowers. Deborah loves green flowers. So I was kind of keen to have another green flower in the garden. And I was just checking on it this morning, and it looks like it's putting up another bloom spike as well. So that's kind of cool. So I have no idea where you can get this. It was a random thing at a Trader Joe's, mass potted plant offering. So
Is it big enough to divide yet?
no, it's been a little bit slow for me. Yeah, I don't quite have enough to divide. I was quite surprised that this fellow sent me a bulb, a small division.
Nice.
I've never met him before, but he sent it to me right away. So it's very nice.
Every time I see these orchids, I'm just amazed at the power of clonal production of plants. How, think of what this plant would have cost 50 years ago. And
Oh, totally.
Goes for less than a box of cereal. It's just amazing.
It is kind of amazing, yeah.
Oh, and that the other thing is that most of the mini cymbidium hybrids wouldn't have been possible except for Dr. Lee Lenz at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. He figured out that if you could cut the pollinalia down and make it fit into the smaller ones, it would actually pollinate them. And that's the source of a lot of the colorful hybrids in the minis.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Or they're natural, or was it a
Totally artificial.
huh?
Totally artificially hybridized.
Interesting.
Well, so Beryl is on the talk tonight. She gave me this. She couldn't remember what it was at the time, and she asked me what it was. I didn't know it at that moment, but she told me to take it home with me, and I've been growing it ever since. It's a tough little guy. Very delicate. These flowers come about this time of year on these impossibly delicate, thin little stems. The leaves are very stiff and durable. It's been called Velocia in the past. And in fact, it's now currently in the family, the Velociaceae. It's a Gondwana land family, so their plants are very old and they're found in Asia and Africa and South America. So that's kind of interesting. A while ago, we were gone for a few days and we came home and all these leaves that wasn't in flower then, all these leaves had folded up and had a purple cast to them. And I thought I had killed the poor thing, that it had dried out irreparably. And I looked more closely at it and I thought, well, no, it seems like it might actually still have some life. So I gave it a really good watering. And within a day and a half or so, they all opened up again. So that caused me to do some research. And apparently this plant has been studied quite a bit. And others in the family for this sort of resurrection plant capability. I wish I had taken a picture of it in that state. It would have been interesting to compare it here, but I just thought I killed it and should probably compost it. But next time, if that happens again. But it's a charming little plant. The flowers are supposed to smell like coconut. I can't tell any fragrance at all. So I'm not sure what that's about. Anyway, I know that San Marcos has carried this. Berkeley Hort, I think, might be where this plant came from. They actually had it planted in their special extraordinary plant section, according to Beryl. And so it's probably still around. There are lavender and pinkish cultivars in the wild, but from what all my research, it looks like really only the white one is in cultivation, and probably it's clonally propagated and stuff. I've never seen this plant produce seeds or anything. The flowers just shrivel up, so it might be self-sterile or something. But
where is it native to, Sean?
Oh, that's right. It's native to the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa, and it grows on very steep cliff sides, usually close to water seeping, down the mountainside. And so like a lot of plants in that kind of situation, native to that kind of situation, they have to endure occasional dryness. A lot of these plants that we think require constant moisture, they actually can go through a dry period, because that does happen in the wild. So it's, I've just been learning more and more interesting things about this little plant.
Sean, does it have a dormant period at all, or it keeps its leaves year round?
The leaves are evergreen. It's relatively slow. It's starting to spread a bit. The stems, the stems are actually very thin, but they're covered with these bracts that actually hold in a lot of moisture, and adventitious roots actually form under them and stuff. So that's another interesting aspect of the plant that's being studied. This plant will eventually be, 4 feet wide or so. And I'm kind of, now that I know this, I'm sort of wondering if I might put it in a hanging basket or something, because the pictures I've seen show it sort of on a vertical cliff, dangling down. So that seems like it could be very interesting to grow it that way. It doesn't care what soil you give it, as long as it's well drained. It apparently will tolerate, heavy clay or anything, as long as it doesn't, it's not sodden. So I have it in just a standard potting mix, nothing special. And I haven't potted it in quite a while. It is a slow grower.
Thank you, Sean. Beryl, you had your hand up, but you put it down. Do you want to ask a question?
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, Sean said 4 feet and Berkeley Hort wasn't selling it. They had it in a plot which was at least 4 by 4 in the ground, and it was just a dense, super dense ground cover there, at least 4 by 4. They weren't selling it. I just asked them if I could take a little piece and they let me.
Good
It
deal.
apparently does propagate relatively easily, so. But most of the outfits I've seen who offer it often say, well, we only get a few of these a year. So it probably means that, yeah, they're just not as, it doesn't grow very fast. So there's not a lot of cutting material available. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll continue the rest of this after our presentation for Sula. Bart, will you introduce Sula for us?
Yes, I've made a few notes, but Sula, make sure to add anything that you want that I happen to forget. Sula is originally from the UK, from England, from a small town. She comes from a family of scientists. Both of her parents are PhDs. Some of you may be familiar with her father, who is the world expert in passion vines and has written at least a couple of books on them. A relative of hers was, going back, was actually the person that did the monograph on tsetse flies in Africa. So Sula comes by her scientific cred familially. She came to the US first to work in the herbarium in Mississippi, and so she can be prevailed upon when necessary to speak Southern. She also, after that, came to Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, where she got her master's degree by doing, and her project was the flora of the San Quintin area of Baja California, one of the real biodiversity hotspots of the California floristic province portion of Baja California, because a lot of desert taxa and a lot of very unusual plants occur in that area. I happened to be the person to take her to Baja on her first field trip there. And it was quite a memorable field trip, as we even found a dead body.
Oh my gosh.
And Sula went back. So she's not someone easily dissuaded from things once she decides she really likes them. She's done a lot of work on the flora and conservation of Baja California, and in particular, the islands of both the Pacific and the Gulf islands of Baja. She's also I'm not sure what the correct term is, but certified or licensed ship captain. So she can actually captain her own ship to go places when needed. She currently is working jobs in both California and in Baja California. The pandemic certainly screwed up a lot of the Baja stuff because the border's been closed and difficult. But again, now that things are seemingly getting back to normal again, I have no doubt that she'll be down south lots in the near future. She got her PhD, I should have mentioned, at UC Riverside under Dr. Ezekiel Esquera, and her work centered again on Baja California and had several facets to it, including fog, and the fact that a lot of the shell middens of the indigenous peoples of Baja were responsible for the northerly distribution of a lot of native cacti species that otherwise don't go into the California floristic province. So she's done all kinds of interesting stuff. She travels extensively. She goes everywhere. Nothing phases Sula. And she's a wonderful friend. So without further ado, Sula Vanderplank.
Wow, thank you, Bart. That might be the best introduction of my whole life. I will say that I do owe you, and I will always owe you for taking me to Baja California for the first time in 2005. It was January of 2005. And so when you asked me to give a talk, well, I'd do anything for you. So the talk that I prepared for you guys tonight is about fog. I will confess that I've never given a talk entirely about fog before. It comes up in every talk I ever give. And I'm somewhat humbled to be talking to you about fog because you live in such a foggy place. So I'm hoping that this will be more of a discussion, that this will be thought-provoking. Now, I'd love your feedback and your thoughts about the kind of things I'm going to bring up, but I wanted to give kind of a review of what we're learning about the impacts of fog in arid lands, specifically in Baja California, and see if that relates back to things you're seeing in your gardens. We don't hear enough from gardeners and from the horticultural community about what you're seeing and what you're finding and what you can grow. Certainly with fog studies, it's been hard to find information. It's been hard to pull it all together. And so I'm hoping that today I can just throw out some ideas and go over some different sort of principles and see what you think. Please do feel free to interrupt with questions. Don't let me go too fast. Don't let me go too slow. Don't let me get lost in the woods. You know, this is a talk for you. So I really, you know, want it to be what you're looking for. So, does fog matter? Is the title we came up for this talk, just to really sort of ask this question: how important is fog in our ecosystems, and what is it doing? So I'm going to be focused on Baja California because I almost exclusively work in Baja California now. I have a couple of projects on the California Islands, but really 95% of my work is on the Baja California Peninsula. So just to remind you, the peninsula is over 1,000 kilometers long and spans all the way from the Mediterranean climate region down to the tropics, all through the Great Deserts. And so I have got a few maps in this presentation, bear with me, but since we're talking about fog and its impacts, there's quite a bit of geography involved here. But just quickly to introduce Baja California, this is the number slide for people who love numbers, but roughly 4,000 plants on the peninsula now, roughly 90% native, about 10% non-native plants. More plants in the northern state of Baja California, but as you can see here, a huge difference of about 500 except between the northern and the southern state. When we look at endemism, so endemic plants restricted to a region, more of those in the southern state. Even though there's less native plants, more endemism, unsurprising because they're so isolated and so far away. And just 135 found in the middle. So most of that endemism is actually towards the end, either up in the Mediterranean region or down in the tropics. Not so many in the desert. And about an overall rate of 25% of the species on the peninsula found nowhere else in the world. Lots of exciting plants in Baja California to hopefully add to your plant palettes, especially with climate change and going forward. So something to be thinking about, I think, during this talk is which of these plants are candidates for your gardens in future. So this is a map that shows you mean annual precipitation for the peninsula. I think this really shows you the biogeography better than anything. So you can see here in the north, that's our winter rainfall. That's our California floristic province, winter rainfall coming straight down, Chaparral, very California ecosystems. And in the middle here is that high elevation mountain range, the Sierra San Pedro Marte. It's leaving a really stark rain shadow effect. So you see that very red, hot, very dry desert to the east. As you move down the peninsula, of course, we get that great central desert dominated by these big cacti that first took me to see in 2005, and that was it. There was no going back. And all the way down at the end here, the other blue that you're seeing, that's tropical summer rain. That's tropical region with the Sierra Laguna, which is also a sky island with oaks and pines down there at the tip, much more tropical. So this is the general overview of the peninsula. And of course, that northern part, that Mediterranean climate part of our California floristic province. So this is our shared floristic province and our shared species. And just to note, it's only about 5% of the province that's found in Mexico, but it does include more than 10% of of the endemic plants of the California forested province. So where's all this fog coming from? Just quickly to look at it on a global scale. This is a map of sea surface temperatures. So here all the continents are gray. You'll see I've tried to put the Mediterranean climate regions of the world in green. You can see them mapped on here, there's little green circles. What you'll notice, running through the middle, this is basically the equator, and as the Earth spins, we get this spin right around the equatorial line. And that forms these gyres, ocean gyres. And those gyres spinning water pulls water away from the sides of our continents. And that's how we get our coastal upwelling, our cold upwelling that comes from the deep. So if you notice, blue is of course cold water, and the red is warm water. Cold water is following these gyres pulling away from these continents. Though they're going in opposite directions, we're seeing very similar patterns. So interestingly, as we look at the globe at around 30 degrees of latitude, each of our Mediterranean regions transitions into a great desert. Most of them have an adjacent cold water upwelling. The exception, of course, is Australia. So one of the future things I would love to understand better is what is the absence of this foggy coast in Australia into our Mediterranean floras? That's really a question for another day. But just to give you some sense of that comparison, so in 4 of our 5 Mediterranean regions, you see is cold water upwelling and an adjacent foggy coast. So I'm hoping theoretically these same principles are going to apply, you know, in these other 3 Mediterranean regions at least. There's some interesting things to think about there at the global scale. If we zoom back into Baja California, you can see more easily now. Blue coast, this is all our cold water upwelling. It's cool right along here. So the basis of our fog is really just that cold water with that hot sun above. When that is stable, the cold water, the hot sun, we get a foggy layer. For the purposes of this talk, really, I'm not going to distinguish different types of fog. I don't mind if that fog is a few meters off the ground, if it's right down on the ground. Fog and low clouds combined, but I'm just going to be talking about maritime influence, really. So marine layer, as it's also often known, or coastal fog in general. And so that's what this looks like on the peninsula, just to give you some sense of our foggy coasts. So a couple of things to notice here. I'm sorry, I'll go back really quickly. Gulf water, this is the Gulf of California. That water's hot. So if you see here, there's no fog coming up the Gulf. This is pretty fog free. This is our Pacific side, and of course that current, that California current, bringing that cold water down sort of with a northwesterly wind, northwesterly direction. So these fogs tend to blow slightly northwest, from the northwest inland. And so you can kind of see that here in this image, the sort of direction and flow here, and they're just coming offshore here below. There's often a swirl here in that sort of crook of the peninsula, the fog patterns too. And we'll look at some more pictures like this. I wanted to show you quickly the topography, because the other thing that really plays in how far the fog's traveling inland and what's happening to that fog and how it's affecting our plants is this topography. This just shows you the elevation of the peninsula. Red is high, green is low. I want to point out in particular a real break in topography here. So fog tends to come down here, it blows up against the mountains, it's dissipating, it stays along the coast. Here it can blow right across the peninsula. And in this region, we actually get some of our richest fog deserts on the whole peninsula. This is just a couple of snapshots. I'm actually going to show you a couple of pictures of some of our amazing fog deserts. But this area here, just adjacent to the Sierra San Borja, as you go down to Bahia de Los Angeles, if you guys know this area, this island is Isla Ángel de la Guarda. This is Bahia de Los Angeles. This is the Sierra San Borja. With the Sierra Libertad here below and Sierra La Asamblea above. This break in the topography, I think, is the most fabulous piece of fog desert on the peninsula. And so this isn't actually the focus of my talk, but I couldn't talk about fog in Baja California without mentioning this special place. And I wanted to show you a couple of these examples of obvious fog impacts here where we've got air plants growing in our desert plants. So this blows my mind every time I see it. Look at these ball moss. This is Tillandsia recurvata, ball moss growing in ocotillos, just covered. And so this is from that area that we were just talking about, where that fog seems to blow right across the peninsula from the Pacific. It's also found in other sort of large succulents. So our endemic Pachycormus discolor, or the elephant tree, or elefante, Spanish here, just laden with that same tillandsia or ball moss. And even our boojum trees, or cereos as we call them in Mexico, it's covered in these air plants. And so you can see that fog impact even when you can't see the fog. You know, and so there's these telltale signs of what's going on here in this sort of foggy central desert. But I wanted to go, hopefully you all know the boojum tree from the center of Baja, but I wanted to use that as an example to just make sure that as I'm talking about endemism, everyone's with me. So the boojum tree is believed to be endemic to the Baja California Peninsula, though there's a small colony over in Sonora, so it's not truly endemic. So we would say this plant is endemic to Mexico and near endemic to Baja California. So I hope that makes sense. So when I'm talking about endemism, it's always within the Baja California Peninsula for the purposes of this talk. So I've had the joy of working with Bart for many years, and one of the things that I think is one of the most valuable contributions that we've been making together, and thanks to Bart's leadership, putting together this inventory of rare, threatened, and endangered plants. And this is just for the California floristic province portion of the peninsula. So this is just for that shared Mediterranean climate area. And Bart can tell you more about this, but it is coming out soon. And a couple of the most amazing things to me is this high level of endemism. So lots of plants restricted to California floristic province in Baja California. Almost 200 California Native Plant Society listed rare plants from California occur in Baja California here too. It's a really special place. And if you dig into what that looks like, just to remind you here on the map, talking about these Mediterranean regions. So these are those mountains. That's the chaparral coming down here into coastal scrubs. This is our maritime succulent scrub. There's 172 plants completely restricted to this small area, an additional 66 that have a small occurrence just across the border. Really high levels of restricted species. If you look at how they map out in terms of geography, well, there's a big blob of endemism here in the Sierra San Pedro Marte, that high peak, which is to be expected. There's a ton of endemism all along this coastal plain. But spoiler alert, we think this is all coastal fog impact. And so this is how I got interested in fog, and this is really how, how fog became exciting to me, was understanding how on earth could we have this band, all these different species found nowhere else in the world, just along a coast. We've got no geographic barriers, there's nothing stopping their distribution. Why would they only be just here along the coast? Now, and you probably have a similar situation in your foggy coasts, I'm sure. What we expected to see, the Mediterranean transitioned into the desert, the Mediterranean species dropping off like this, and the desert species kind of overlapping, and maybe a slight increase in the different plants found there. It isn't what we found at all. We really found is that the Mediterranean species drop off at a fairly steady rate. Desert species really don't come in. It's just a local peak of plants found nowhere else in the world, or locally endemic species. So suddenly there's a cluster of things found just along that foggy coast. They're not found anywhere else. And so, so this is in part what I think is amazing about what fog can do, not just in terms of growing plants, but in terms of that footprint it can leave on the landscape. So, basically, and to show you this slide again, we think that this foggy coast around Mediterranean Mexico has basically caused the climate to be more stable for a long time. That through time, that's allowed us to have a much lower level of extinction, and perhaps higher levels of radiation of different plants. So we've got suddenly this amazing little belt along the coast of rare and unusual plants. Some of these we know from the fossil record were once much more widespread. A couple of examples here are Tecate cypress and our bishop pine. No, these were much more widespread, but now in Baja California, restricted to foggy canyons, coastal bluffs, foggy edges, unusual rock types. And so we think this is a refugial effect. The fog is basically forming a climate refugium where things that are being pushed out by climate change are hanging on because their conditions are ameliorated by that fog. That's half the story. And there's a couple of other, it's hard for us, we don't have a great fossil record in Baja California, so it's hard for us to identify these. But there's a couple of other things that don't have any close relatives. They're the only species in their genus that we think have fairly basic characters and are probably also ancient lineages. And so there's a couple here, Telia Aptera. This is our native citrus. You can see, look at the fruits. You can see it looks just like the rind of a lemon or an orange. This is one of our native citrus restricted to our region. And Adenothamnus validus is a very rare plant. I actually have another slide on it later. I'll talk about it some more, but I am amazed to hear from Bart O'Brien that you guys can grow this in the Bay Area. And so, you know, is the Bay Area a potential new home for my foggy endemic plants? I'm really hoping there's lots of potential here, and I'd love to hear what you're thinking about some of these things. But so that foggy coast forming this climate refugium today also, as climate continues to change, can promote speciation. And so we also get a lot of what appear to be newly endemic plants. So sort of new species, young species. So one example comes from the genus Hazardia. And this genus, we have a lot of plants really growing side by side like a patchwork quilt. Flowers are almost identical in a lot of cases. Some have ray flowers, some don't. A lot of differences in the leaf morphology here. Different leaves, different sizes, different vegetative characters, but all growing side by side, seemingly recently separated. Another example, of course, comes from Dudleyas, which I'm sure you know well. But we understand that Rosetophilus life form, those rosettes, to also be fog-gathering life forms, and we certainly see a huge number of Dudleya radiations on often very young soils. So the Dudleya in the middle here is Dudleya antonii, which is endemic to San Quintin volcanoes and those volcanic soils. Well, the last eruption there was only 11,000 years ago. Some of these substrates are very young, and very, very recent speciation events, seemingly. Separation, presumably from Pulvia lenta for this Dudleya, appears to be very recent. So having both these phenomena in the same place is really exciting and sort of mind-boggling in terms of what the fog is really doing long-term. So majority of these endemic species on the coast are found in this habitat called the Maritime Succulent Scrub, which is my favorite habitat. And it's this fantastic mix of life forms. I mean, to me, it's the ultimate natural garden. You've got drought deciduous plants, rosette plants, succulent plants, evergreen plants, everybody growing together on this beautiful coastal bluff. It doesn't get any better than this for me. This mix of different life forms and the way a lot of different life histories are all able to grow together, I think also speaks a lot to that refugial effect. So that climate's been buffered, it's allowed a lot of things to carry on living the way they've been living without forcing them to migrate north or south. So if you think about climatic change in the long-term sense, as things have changed a lot more further inland along the coast, a lot of things were maintained. And as things went extinct elsewhere, they didn't go extinct here. And so you're left with a much richer, diverse mix, and it's also very phylogenetically diverse. So although we've got some of these recent speciation events that are close together, we've got a lot of very different lineages too. So I hope I've convinced you it's a really special place, but I think what's more interesting to think about is just these phenomena and how this is happening. So this is just to show you a map of what that maritime succulent scrub is really looking like. And so it's here at the bottom. It's this transitional vegetation type really as you transition from Mediterranean to desert. As I said, it's just got this rich mix of cacti and annuals and all sorts of drought deciduous things and all sorts of plants. And here's another view of that. This is one of my favorite pictures of all time that John Traeger at the Huntington actually took, but he got the light just right. I took the same picture on the same day, but mine didn't come out like this. And I love the way he's got all the light on the spines here, all through that habitat. Some of the dominant players here, obviously the maguey or century plant, the Agave shoei, hugely dominant in some of these coastal plains, but really being lost at an enormous rate. We're losing our coast to development, to agriculture daily. Daily we lose hectares and hectares of our coastal lands. But we think that not only is the agave also somewhat adapted to collecting fog in the rosettes, but that those rosettes are tighter in Agave shoei because that's a fire adaptation. Their ability to move up and live in a Mediterranean climate and live in fire weather, very significant. And so if you look at the sister taxon, Agave shoei subspecies Goldmaniana, you'll see the much more open rosette. There's not that same protection of the apical meristem. And so we think that there's this combination of adaptation to the fog, but also to the oncoming fire weather and the more Mediterranean climate regime that you can see as you move north in these agaves. So you guys are going to have to cut me off. I could talk about these all day. But this is also the velvet cactus or the golden Sirius, or in Spanish we call it el cacto artopesilado, and it's Burger Cactus emorii. And so this is the only species in the genus. It's also on California's Channel Islands. It has that wonderful disjunct from Baja California to the California Channel Islands. Again, only in our foggy coasts, and we think that these fine spines are also fog gathering. So I know you guys know a lot about fog harvesting and also foliar uptake of fog into the leaves from your redwoods and a lot of your bay area trees that have been studied. But we think actually cacti and a lot of other lineages are adapting in the same way, collecting the fog, harvesting with these fine spines. So this is one of my favorites for the foggy coast, and I'm curious if you can grow that up there, Bart. I would have thought, yeah.
A little, but they need some winter protection in cold years.
That makes sense. We're actually seeing it resprouting in fires too, so we suspect it's another one of these species that, although it's got more desert origin as it's moving into more fire weather, also that presence in the fog is going to reduce some of that fire trouble. Another really nice example is our wild rose, or Rosa de Castilla in Spanish, which we also, well, there's a lot of stories about this rose. One of the only cases I know of where one botanist pulled a gun on another over the name. There was a standoff between, I think it was Marcus Jones and Orcutt over who was going to rush back to San Diego and name it. I think Jones wanted to name it Rosa horribilis. But you can see that Rosa minutifolia, one, because it does have tiny leaves. So this beautiful rose mostly grows on clay soils, also all throughout a sort of fog belt. You can see a little map there in the corner, gives you a sense of its distribution. There was an occurrence in southern San Diego County. It was concreted over for a car sales lot, and so I now consider this one of our Baja California endemics, but certainly also very much found in the fog zone. Another example, and you can see conveniently, you can see the dewdrops, the sort of fog drops all over these particular plants, but this is Euphorbia Misery, and I've got pictures here of both the red and green forms of the bracts there. The cliff spurge also grows on the California Channel Islands. Some of these lineages do appear to be shared to the islands, presumably historically. A couple of other examples of things that are just unique to our area along the coast. This was Vigeria. I'm sorry, I should have updated the name here. This is now Bahiopsis laciniata, San Diego sunflower from our coasts. And of course, Coreopsis has also changed. It's now Leptocine. In my day, it was Coreopsis. But we only really see these in the foggy belt in the adjacent ocean bluffs. Some of these really almost seem to need to be in the salt spray zone to some extent, really very close to the coast. And sometimes in the canyons where the fog is rolling up from the coast. So a lot of these species, and you see again, the very fine leaves. And bear in mind that it's a geophyte, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. Then one cactus that I think is fascinating sort of adaptations to our fog zone, but also to our Mediterranean climate. This is Mammillaria brandegii, subspecies brandegii. The whole body of the cactus is under the ground. When it's fully fleshed out and full of moisture, it's flush with the surface. As it dries down in summer, it dries down slightly into a pit. So I'm hoping you can see here, it's shrunk down. You can see the clay kind of cracking around it. It's shrunk down into the soil. So it's made a little microclimate for itself. It's hunkered down a little bit under the soil surface. It's flowering with winter rain. So most of our cacti flower with summer rain flowering and responding. This one's flowering in winter. And so we think we're seeing transition towards adaptations to Mediterranean climate, Mediterranean pollinators, starting to follow that winter rain and have flowers at a different time of year, but all sorts of strange adaptations happening together in this climatic transition zone. It's just a really, really special place, and hopefully some interesting plants to think about. And I just want to mention, of course, a lot of dune plants too. I just put one up here as an example. This is a Nemacollis. Both varieties are, of course, of conservation concern for us, and they grow together on the dunes in Baja California. But this is our coast woolly heads. rare in San Diego, rare in Baja California. And a lot of these dune plants too do seem to be relying on that fog moisture. And this is just a picture of San Quintin, the volcanoes, shrouded in fog. And you can see them blowing over the craters here, coming in and really settling on the land. So the first time we ever went to Baja California, we arrived here in the dark and we set up our cots in the dark, and I was covered in fog moisture and I woke up freezing cold and soaking wet. That turns out to be the most interesting thing that's ever happened to me, and I've been studying it for 20 years. Thank you, Bart. But I ended up doing a little bit of my doctoral work on this fog gradient. I don't want to go too much into the charts and lines, but I wanted to show you, this is where I had weather stations. And so I did this study just through this climatic transition. So you can see the rainfall's really dropping off through here, getting really dry really quickly. Actually lose 1 millimeter of rain for every kilometer you drive south in this transition zone. So every kilometer we move down this gradient from about Ensenada to San Quintin, we're losing 1 millimeter of rain a kilometer. The gradient's really steep. There's just a close-up of these weather stations, just to give you a sense of what we did. And so we put a 1 kilometer grid around each of the weather stations and tried to understand the phenology of all the perennial plants in that 1 kilometer surrounding the weather station. So we tried to use really nice big sampling units, so we're not getting microclimates and little funny, was it north facing, south facing? You just take a whole square kilometer and compare. In a nutshell, I'm just going to show you this middle graph here. The two sites that were further inland, so Santo Tomas here was actually very rainy. Covarrubias here, a lot less rain, but further inland, far, far hotter than the 3 coastal sites. And you can see, the rainfalls as I showed you, so from high to low as you go down here. If you see the humidity, the closer you were to the coast, the higher the humidity was. So you've basically got a fog gradient from west to east, from high to low. And it's much drier and hotter inland. Well, you know this because you live on foggy coasts. But this shows you the kilometers, the distance from the coast that each of these weather stations actually are. So you can see those that are about 20 kilometers offshore, Santo Tomas and Covarrubias, much further inland, much hotter. So once we get over about 15 kilometers, we really start heating up. That's roughly the fog impact zone here. And I just want to show you this one graph that basically shows you how the fog arrives when it's needed. That fog forms in the height of summer. When it gets hot, a hot sun over that cold water forms that fog. So it's almost on demand. So the red lines here are the foggy coastal sites, and the blue lines are the inland rainy site. Just to show you here, the inland site gets really hot. Coastal site, the fog comes up right as the temperature comes up, keeps that temperature a lot cooler. It's basically on demand. So every summer it's hot, fog goes up. At the coast, the inland, humidity drops and the temperature spikes. You can see these sort of opposite effects summer to winter. This is a 3-year sequence that you're seeing. Some of that stuff's fairly intuitive. Monitoring the phenology and then being able to compare back to these weather patterns, we were able to look at a few different things. When did the plants start flowering? Synchrony. They all flower at once. Duration. How long did they flower for? These are the 3 questions we're asking at those sites. So remember, it's basically a question of what's happening inland versus on the coast. These 3 flowering properties. And I'm trying to just hit the highlights of this for you, but give me a yell if you need me to slow down or go over anything. So I mentioned that we had these 1 kilometer squares. I actually did this for 86 different plant taxa in the sample area to try and get a really broad sense. I mean, I'm into floristics, so I already had learned these plants from my master's. So it was nice to be able to go back and look at their flowering times. It's just a very simple sort of 3-point scale on trying to understand how much they were flowering. And we put this all together. We identified 3 very different traits in the flora. By far the most species, about 90% of species fall into category A. And this is species that flower when it rains. Very, very moisture dependent, very much responding to water. So this is relevant to the fog as well, often dominated by the rainfall. If it rains everywhere, then that's when all the flowering is going to start. If it doesn't rain, that's when the fog becomes more important. There's a handful of things that seem to be driven by day length and flower very reliably in the same month. And aseasonal bloomers. Okay, yeah, so they appear to be a grab bag of different things going on. So some of the succulents fall into this category. Sometimes the species where everybody seems to flower opportunistically and have no seasonality at all, it's probably a mixed bag. But most plants respond very strongly to water in our region. And most of the models on flowering times are based on temperature. For us in the arid lands, moisture is extremely important. And so what you're seeing here is just the percentage of flower. Well, let's start with the top graph. So this is phenological amplitude variation in flowering. Here you're seeing the red ones, of course, are inland, and the blue ones are on the coast. So you see here very high amplitude inland, low amplitude on the coast, buffered by the fog. What does that amplitude mean? That's basically your synchrony. It's basically your synchrony and pulsing of flowering. So this bottom graph showing you the exact same thing, but in a different way. Here, these peaks, the red inland peaks are much higher. As you go inland, there's much higher peaks where everything's flowering at once. Along the coast, it's a much flatter curve. Flowering's much less synchronous, less sporadic, less seasonal, much more of a sort of year-round, lower level flowering. As you go inland, that flowering is very pulsed, very synchronous. Everybody flowers for 2 months and then they dry up and they're done. So that might seem kind of obvious, you know, when you think about driving inland and having a shorter flowering season, things flowering for longer along the coast. It has a lot of different implications for pollination and also for ecology. So the synchrony of the flowering is much higher at the site, less foggy sites. So that means an open market to all get eaten at once too, and you can attract large swarms of predators. So synchrony is a risky business. Although it might seem to be a lot more effective for pollination, it doesn't necessarily guarantee good outcrossing either, because the plants growing very close together may be very closely related and you might not get good long distance gene transfer. So there's a lot of ecological implications from this synchrony. That duration is also very different. So along the coast, you've got a much longer time during the year to flower and to make seeds and to cross-pollinate with other species. And perhaps the distance between the plants is further. That's actually better for genetic exchange. You're lowering that risk of predation. And pollination might be slightly tougher, but you've got a lot more time to get it done. So you start to see how you can think in deep time. These processes could really be part of the extinctions that we're seeing, part of that coastal richness that we're seeing. If you're pushed to flower for shorter and shorter times in denser and denser aggregates, you're likely to suffer genetic degradation. On both sites, the onset's controlled by moisture. It's usually rain because the rain's dominant in terms of offering moisture, but it can also be affected by the fog. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a study we did recently with the Climate Science Alliance. We tried to put together data for the San Diego region, and in our case, working on fog, we actually included all of Northwest and Baja California. So it's kind of a cross-border fog study with just a few specific examples. If you're interested in this, you can download the report here at the San Diego County Ecosystems page from the Climate Science Alliance. There's a public-friendly short report and then a full, detailed, heavy science report if you're fascinated. But to give you a couple of the highlights from that, environmental effects of CLCF, coastal low clouds and fog. So again, here we're not distinguishing low clouds from fog. This is foggy coast, marine layer, whatever you want to call it, all rolled into one. Very difficult to separate them out, especially from satellite images and the kind of weather tracking that we do. But we know that the fog reduces the temperature during the day and increases the temperature at night. We also know that it reduces the light, increases diffuse light. We also know that it reduces evapotranspiration, so the plants just aren't as drought stressed. So one really important thing to know is that yes, there is direct moisture input. That's probably the least important thing that the fog's doing. The fog really is just reducing the stress by blocking the light, lowering the temperature, and reducing the transpiration of the leaves. That's the most important thing happening. And you can see here just some examples. So this is summer temperatures, winter temperatures, but look at temperature difference in this third chart. A whole coast, very low temperature change. And you know this from living in foggy areas too. This is what's important for plants. So for us in the arid lands, it's not so much the direct input of the fog on the leaves even, and it doesn't matter if those clouds are actually 5 meters off the ground. What matters is that lowering of solar radiation and that lowering of temperature. And so, hopefully we've touched on a few of these things, but coastal low clouds and fog are ameliorating the summer drought, adding moisture, providing shade. They're also influencing the distributions and the biological diversity, which I hope I've just sort of shown you for Baja California, how important fog is to all sorts of processes that are resulting in the distribution of our species. And plants as well, there's an increase in seed set, there's an increase in fecundity in general, there's an increase in fitness. We're also now seeing increases in seedling survival and growth rates. So that foggy presence is helping the plants in all sorts of different ways. And there's been some really interesting studies in restoration efforts on the Channel Islands too. They're seeing that outplantings in the fog zone are having far, far higher survival rates than outplantings outside the fog zone. So we're really starting to see some of these fog impacts on the landscape, but I can't emphasize enough how little documented evidence we really have of some of these things. I hope it maybe inspires someone to start collecting some data on these. And just one note, it does pass right through the trophic chain too. So in birds, we also see changes in behavior. And in reptiles, they can actually absorb the water through their skin. And we can actually look to worldwide examples from those foggy regions of the world. We talked about. So this is just a picture of Agave sebastiana too, flowering in heavy fog on the islands. And we'll talk about the islands in a minute here. Another thing to note is that fog can affect pollination too. So a plant growing in heavy fog can actually suffer reduced pollination, but also reduced floral predation. So there's that balance point between how many insects you really want to visit your flowers. Are they eating your pollen or what else is happening? And this is a picture to show that recovery of native grasslands too. So this is a foggy grassland being restored. And you can see here the resprouting in the fog. Lots of positive benefits. So this is a map that shows how the fog actually impacts our plant communities. And so in this map, what you're seeing are actually Axelrod's determinations of types of coastal sage scrub. So you'll see here, this is about that rainfall cutoff around Ensenada. Remember, this was pretty blue, and then from here it really starts drying up. You can see that the extension of this Diegan scrub all the way down here correlates beautifully with that foggy coast. Just one exception here, and that's actually our transverse ranges and our east-west mountain range here. So you can see that's actually an elevation impact with that scrub coming through here. These really map beautifully on top of one another. So we're gathering more and more evidence for the importance of this fog. And the other thing, of course, the other habitat that it so impacts is Maritime Chaparral. This is just a map of Ceanothus verrucosus, show how it tends to cling to that fog zone. But we've got a couple of other examples in Baja California, one being Arctostaphylos australis, which seems to be one of our more ancient lineages in the region. And the other is, of course, Salvia brandegii. And Bart just told me today that you can actually grow Salvia brandegii in the Bay Area too, and I'm blown away. It makes perfect sense because I do think the dependency on the fog as opposed to the rainfall or other climatic conditions is very important with these species. In part, we always thought it was because it reduced fire frequency, that it was the absence of fire that was keeping these maritime chaparral outcrops. I think the evidence is pointing to there actually being also more physiological dependencies on the fog itself.
We also do grow Arctostaphylos australis up here too.
No way, that is amazing.
Yeah, it's doing really well here.
Wow, I love that my rare plants are going to be okay in the Bay Area. Thank you, Bart. I hope these are some great options for your gardens too. I mean, I think that salvia is one of the best smelling, most beautiful salvias out there. Does it do really well, that area?
Yeah, very well.
No, fantastic. Just a couple more key points here. Obviously, the fog is really controlling the biogeography of a lot of species and communities. Drought relief is also very important even where there's not a lot of fog water input. So we're starting to see that even a little fog can make a big difference at the right time of year. We're also seeing these differences in dynamics, reduced fire hazard, as I've just mentioned, this idea of climatic refugia, and that the future of all this is very uncertain. So one of the things I'm trying to look at right now, and this is brand new, but I wanted to share just a couple of images with you of what I'm thinking about next, is what that Pacific moisture is doing beyond our Mediterranean zone. And so most of my time I've spent looking at that transition from Mediterranean to desert. But as I mentioned, we have these fog deserts, we have these other patterns on the peninsula. You can see here, this is our jet stream coming down from the north just before storm is coming in. If you see the next day, well, that's the fog coming across the Vizcaíno right here in the middle. That's the foggy desert again in the middle. Here's that tropical storm coming across the Cape. These storms almost always come up the Gulf of California and drop the tropical rain on the inside. And so I wanted to extrapolate a little bit. So what's that Pacific cold air influence doing to the peninsula itself? And if you look, the biogeographic provinces, basically to my mind, this whole side of the peninsula down to about here is really getting heavy fog influence. And the inside is really tropical. And so if you look again at the topography, this makes perfect sense. So here's your foggy coast as it gets blocked, pops across the peninsula here, comes in here around these mountains, and it starts to swirl out here and disappear, as evidenced here. You can see that fog swirling off here seems to be about the end where that Pacific cold air influence reaches. And so I put together just a couple of maps of some popular groups to show you kind of these contrasting patterns. So if we look at roses, all the roses up and down the peninsula, you see that same foggy Pacific edge pattern. You see it coming right across here through that low patch, right around the side of the Asamblea, where it's all very foggy, all through here. Out on Cedros Island, which is foggy, Guadalupe Island, which is foggy, and petering out. And then there's a little Sky Island effect here. Now, Passifloracea, the opposite, coming up from the tropics, all through the tropics, all up the inside, out on the islands, almost nothing on the Pacific coast. These points aren't perfect. These maps are from GBIF, just to give you a general sense. This is just to show you sort of what I'm thinking about now, is which of these species are good indicators for fog and fog presence and fog reach. So the fact that we have things like Aeschylus all the way down coast, all the way down to here, that's a fog impact. Rainfall dried up well before now. But you can see that foggy coast extension. Same here with Artemisia. You see it coming across into that fog desert. What is Artemisia doing all the way down here? Well, it's coming with that fog. And you can see it out on these islands too. A couple more interesting examples. Niebla, this is that lichen that's epiphytic on those cacti in the central desert. But it would be interesting to map this and take a look. You can see a very strong Pacific coast influence all the way down now. Doesn't seem to be as much needing that dense fog as just this Pacific air somehow. It's interesting that it's all the way down here. It's breaking the rules. The other plant breaking the rules is, of course, the Tillandsia, which seems to come up from the tropics, then take foot all through this foggy area. These are just a couple of sort of anomalies in the general patterns. I wanted to show you too, one thing I think is really interesting and I would like to study and understand better. Why are there so many geophytes following this pattern? What is it that fog is offering to our bulb forming and corm forming and perennials geophytes? So Delphinium with its underground storage organs, Allium with its bulbs, Diclostema with its bulbs, very same fog pattern, very strongly. Look at that coming right down here, all through the foggy areas out here and along the Vizcaíno. Same with the Delphinium, and same with the Diclostema. So, I think there's a lot more research to be done on what cold, foggy Pacific air is really doing to these distributions, and whether these are just refugial effects, whether these plants were up and down the peninsula the whole way down before, and this is where they've been left behind. Well, just a lot more to understand. And then just for fun, to just sort of wind this talk up, I wanted to just quickly take you to a couple of those foggy islands. So it's hard to talk about Baja without mentioning Guadalupe Island. So we'll go to Guadalupe Island and then we'll come over here to Cedros Island, just quickly take a look at some of the examples of these amazing fog sort of microcosms. So to me, these islands offer you a glimpse into what's going on in the bigger area in just a small microcosm. So this is Guadalupe Island in the fog. When you're on the island, you can see that fog just billowing over the north end. I'm sure you guys know that the island was completely denuded by goats. This is a picture taken in 2000 when the island was almost barren of vegetation. It's been coming back amazingly. I went with Bart in 2010. Guadalupe Island, and these are some pictures that we took of that recovery. The trees at that point were all over 100 years old because the goats had been munching every seedling for over 100 years. Distribution of the trees is also very linked to that fog. And you could see in the exposures where the goats had not been able to eat the plants that the pines were coming back gangbusters. And so to have these pine forests on an island this far south, you can see the importance of this fog. And we think the same is true, of course, for the endemic cypress here, Guadalupe cypress. You can see that fog blowing in. And this is my gratuitous picture of with the new species of pseudonephalium out there on Guadalupe Island. The other island, of course, is Cedros, and Cedros was actually named Huamalgua, the indigenous people of the island, and Huamalgua means island of fogs. So Cedros also has a really strong fog pattern. So you can see here, this is a picture from the south looking north, and hopefully you can see that fog coming from the north, and this crest here is actually a pine forest. So I'm going to show you what that map looks like. That fog blows in against these northern faces, and as it gains elevation, you get a Monterey pine forest here on the north end, and then again in the middle of the island, there's a sort of second peak, and you get another set of pine forest here, and that's the chaparral up on top and in the middle. That pine forest is one of the most stark vegetation differences you'll ever see. So look at that line. This is the north-facing slope, and then the south-facing slope, nothing. Completely sheer lines. Of the pines themselves, very foggy. When you're up in them, it's foggy, covered in lichens. You could just see that stark difference. This is now looking at the south-facing slope, and you can see they're only on the north-facing. South-facing slopes are barren. It's a fascinating distribution pattern where you can just really see a fog impact, and I think we've underestimated the importance of this fog on the mainland for a long time. A lot of lessons from the island here, and this is just to show you that pine forest, right, walking along the crest here. So you've got all the pines on the left and none on the right, right along the crest of that mountain. Just a couple more views here because I think that's an amazing view. And here's Agave sebastiana again the rosettes, again the fog. We talked about those pollinators. And so I'm curious about how many of the Cedros Island plants can also be grown in the Bay Area. And I wondered if either of these are being grown in Bay Area gardens right now.
Yeah, we actually have Salvia cedrosensis here at the Botanic Garden. The selection that Carol did, Baja Blanca, and we have grown Penstemon cedrosensis, but it's short-lived.
Oh, interesting. Always short-lived, or I mean, is it not short-lived in the wild too, or do you think that's a?
I think it's very likely short-lived on the island also. I mean, just seeing the plants different years, they're usually small. There are a few big ones, but on the island they come back, they regenerate from seed. Here they don't seem to regenerate unless we regenerate them.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I'm assuming there's a lot of plants from these foggy places that would also do well. And of course, you know, the poster child of fog plants for this island is the Dudleya pachyphytum, and I understand you are growing that too.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
Gorgeous plant.
Yeah, this only grows in that really foggy highland, and is of course the plant that's been severely impacted in the wild due to theft recently. So I'm really glad to know that it's doing well in Bay Area gardens too. So I just ending with a couple of examples actually from BART of plants that are growing at Tilden that are from Baja California that kind of blow my mind. And so one of those is of course this Aeschylus parrii. This is one of those more temperate species that of course switched to being drought deciduous instead of cold deciduous. Beautiful flowers. My picture of the flower doesn't do this one justice. But it's fantastic that you can grow that up there. Please consider it. It's a treelet that never gets really big. Really nice sort of small tree gardens. Abyssina dissita is one of our rare plants. It's actually listed and managed by the state in California. Pretty abundant in Baja California. I gather that's also doing well in the Bay Area and a good option for your gardens. As I mentioned earlier, I cannot believe that Adenothamnus validus grows in Bay Area gardens because it's so rare. This is one of those putative paleoendemics for us. Very rare in Baja California. So fantastic news for conservation that you can grow this in your gardens too. Please do. And probably the most mind-blowing of all for me was this Marana thamnus, or it used to be berberis and it used to be Mahonia. Had several name changes. It's a very small shrub. Sadly, I didn't have a picture of the flowers. For us, it's endemic to a couple of canyons. It's really, really restricted. Absolutely amazing that it's thriving outside all the way up in the Bay Area. And so again, I think this really points to this dependence on coastal fogs for a lot of these plants. And then perhaps the most amazing, because this would be such a desert species. I understand this is also grown well at UC Botanical Garden and Tilden, I think, that Acanthogylia gloriosa from our deserts. So hopefully Baja California has a lot of plant palette options to offer. And I did wonder if anyone's growing Vermontodendron mexicanum, because this is another of those very rare foggy canyon plants that we're very worried about.
Yes, it's commonly grown.
You have it up there?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so please grow that one too, because we're really losing ground in the wild. We're down to just 2 known live populations now of the 5 original ones in Baja California. And one of those is completely inaccessible due to narco trafficking. So this plant could desperately use your help. And then as a as a final note, it mentions that my dad is a passiflorist. And I was talking to my dad, I told him I was going to give a talk on fog, and he said, oh, well, you know, striping, the only place in the world to flower these 2 passion flowers that he's been growing many, many years in England and has never been able to flower. And so I wanted to show these 2 examples from, this is Passiflora perite from Colombia. This is Passiflora membranacea, also from high elevations of Central America and Mexico. And so obviously my dad in England has the cool temperatures, doesn't have that humid air. And so one thing I had never thought about before was how our coastal fogs and our marine layer might be relating to something more similar to those Andean fogs and those high elevation, moisture, sort of cool cloud forests. And I feel like there's a whole lot more to understand about those parallels. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on those, but with that, I know I'm probably over time and I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sula. Very interesting work and wonderful talk. Yeah, I know that perite is grown up here, but it's not the easiest. The membranacea, I know of a number of specimens that flower regularly, sort of throughout the Bay Area. It's a lot easier than perite to grow and keep and flower.
It's so interesting. I mean, he's been growing them since I was a little girl. Has never been able to get flowers. So
Wow.
yeah, it's just very interesting to think about when he's been trying so hard to flower these plants for decades, and the fact that they only seem to be flowering in these foggy climates. I mean, just observations, you know. It's not good science at this point, but something to think about. I think there's a lot more to think about with fog.
Did he find both difficult to flower or just the perite?
No, both. He's never flowered
No.
either one, and they're both sort of high elevation cloud forest species.
Wow.
So he's wondering now if it's a humidity issue for him, that he just doesn't have that moist, foggy air.
I grew the membranaceae for a long time until my plant was sort of attacked by hooligans and destroyed. But it grew, it flowered prolifically for many, many years, and was very easy. I mean, it's right plant, right place, I guess.
Oh, it's fantastic. I envy you that, because I've never seen it in real life in flower. Just the leaves.
Oh, and the leaves are not to be, I mean, the calyxes are wonderful.
Well,
Anybody else have any questions or comments?
If you think about it, just a lot of what Sula was talking about is very clearly evident in our gardens. Especially again, as you visit gardens near the coast and near the fog zone, and then going in as far inland as like the UC Davis Arboretum or Livermore, you just see a lot more things dropping out, and again, heavier predominance of synchronicity of flowering times as you go inland. And that when you think about this in terms of climate change and so on, it's more how you think about the importance of the coastal regions for long-term, and we're talking deep time long-term, conservation of plants and flora and fauna. It's just so important to keep some of those areas natural and wild so that things can exist there.
Yeah, protect that foggy coast.
Yeah.
Every chance you get, it's likely to be so important going forward. And I think, honestly, you guys will have an opportunity to grow things in your garden that other people just aren't going to be able to grow. And as the climate keeps changing, your gardens are going to be so important for the future of a lot of species, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Sula, what is the development pressure on the land there? Is it for housing, or you mentioned agriculture? What type of agriculture is it being used for?
The coastal plain is very fertile. And so it's massive agriculture right now, like the San Quintin Valley is the #1 world exporter of tomatoes, also cut flowers, onions, broccoli, cauliflower, massive berry production, strawberries, raspberries. The greenhouses are popping up everywhere now. I should have shown you some pictures. I wanted to just focus on fog tonight, but I could give you a whole a whole land use and conservation talk too sometime. They're covered in polythene tunnels and shade houses, and it's almost all for export to the US, interestingly. So we're losing these habitats for the production of our own. With the San Quintin Valley is the #1 supplier for Taco Bell and Del Taco all across the US. Yeah, yeah, there's all sorts of horrible truths to that. And so that agricultural development is very serious. And it used to be people would do some sort of failed agricultural crops for 2 or 3 years just to get the land use change. Once it had changed to agriculture, you could change it to housing. And so for a while there was a lot of really poor agriculture, not even being done with much intention. But now what we're seeing is some very, very successful large-scale agricultural industries taking over that whole coastal plain. Pressure is enormous. I can't overstate how we're losing ground every day.
So Sula, none of those species they're growing sound very fog adapted. So where is the water coming from to grow all these crops?
That's a great point. So it's almost all being groundwater pumped, and there's massive saltwater intrusion. And so now desalination plants are popping up all along the coast. No, they're not fog adapted species. And a lot of the times they're growing them under plastic and keeping the fog out anyway, or the shade houses are catching all the fog moisture. You know, they're not doing themselves any favors in some ways. You're quite right. They're certainly not well adapted. They've just found ways to make this work. And the overdraw on the water table is very significant. We're seeing extirpations of native plants all through the wetlands and lowlands because of it.
Short-sightedness for sure.
Yeah, it's important for our consumers here to know that this is what's happening.
Yeah, and it's also the hypersaline water from the desal plants are oftentimes, at least in the San Quintin area, being put directly into San Quintin Bay, which is one of the only bays of its kind that doesn't have a major river system flushing it out. So that by creating it as a hypersaline area, it's affecting all of the native plants and animals and aquatics that depend on that wetland being a good, viable coastal wetland. It's a very unique spot. And again, the desal plants just have a huge, huge impact on everything else. It's not just the water that they're taking out, it's all the salinity that they're putting back.
And don't eat Driscoll's Mexican strawberries, please. I'd say they're the worst culprit. So some of the agricultural firms have started to work with local conservation organizations, but I think mostly for greenwashing. In all honesty, their footprint's enormous and their offsets are small.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and that an awful lot of the groundwater is Pleistocene. I mean, it's ancient groundwater that's being pumped. And then, as Sula said, the salt water from the Pacific is intruding. So a lot of the natural vegetation won't really be able to continue if all the groundwater becomes more saline as well.
It's worth mentioning the other problem that we're facing is lower and lower snow melt. So with the warming, we're getting less and less snow, and the snow melt replenishes a lot of that aquifer that comes down to a lot of those channels is not coming like it used to.
Just like here in California from the Sierra.
Yeah, it sounds very similar.
Be interesting if they limited agricultural products to 100-mile radius or something. That would change a lot of things, I think, as well as like fish and stuff too.
Yeah, interesting idea.
You go to different places to see different things, and you get this nowhere else, right? New aspect towards travel for sure.
Do you know if there's any communication about this problem with the legislature?
I hesitate because there's so many attempts to improve things in Baja California right now, and ground is being made, not necessarily in this arena. It looks like the state is about to declare the first ever state park in Baja California, which is a huge achievement just for the state to have a state park system and to declare its first ever state park. At the moment, they only have federal protected areas and no state protected areas. So there are mechanisms being created. There are first state parks being born, and at the moment they're kind of urban parks and they're not that great for conservation and biodiversity. But the fact that now a state park can exist and we have a template, we could potentially in future push for state parks in other areas. We're gaining ground in the conservation community. This issue hasn't made it to the table yet.
Any other questions for Sula or any comments or?
Thank you so
So
much.
much. Oh, here comes Josh.
Wonderful. Thank you. This was so enlightening. Thank you so much.
No, thank you guys for the opportunity, and thank you for the push to sort of pull it all together into one. Kind of blew my own mind putting together all the things that we've learned about fog and just how important it is. And so it was really my honor to speak for you guys, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Ellen,
so
for
much.
making it happen too.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bart.
I think with that, I guess we'll complete the plant forum.
Ellen, I was going to say, I think Tosh is here if we wanted to go back and look at Josh's plant.
You're talking about Josh's plant.
Yeah, not the Bilbergia, but what we thought might be Bilbergia.
Oh yeah, that was
I don't think Tosh knew what it was,
Oh,
but I can show it real quick to see if she knows.
I just Venmo'd her money to save Bilbergia.
So Tosh, are you there?
I am, Ellen. I think I knew that plant years ago. Where did it go?
Do you know the well, it's been evidently
No,
deemed.
it's been a very long time since I've known that plant.
Okay, well,
what were the other suggestions?
Oh,
Acmea is what it sounded like it was an Acmea rather than a Bilbergia.
no, it's not.
Is that Tosh? No, it's not an Acmea.
Geez, Ellen, I don't know. It's been so long, too long. I'm sorry, too long.
Well, if you want a piece back, I can give you back a piece.
No, thank you. It's beautiful at your house. No
Okay,
give back.
Connie and Bart gave us 2 samples of the Epicactus gigantea. Connie, are you there?
I am
Where do you grow this in your yard?
in the wettest part. I have an area that's a bog,
Oh,
and that's where I planted it, and it's very happy there.
so is your bog like a plastic lined space in your garden, or how did you bog it? Or is it a container kind of sunk it?
There, no, it's just a wet area naturally. There's underground water.
Lucky you.
Yeah, that's so rare. For those of us who don't have that, does this plant do well in containers? Does anyone know?
Well, mine's it's in the ground. I'm not sure for how long. I think it came from a Cal Hort meeting. I planted it, it comes up, it blooms, it goes away, and then it comes back. I don't really have to do anything.
Does it go deciduous, dies down in the wintertime, you're saying?
Yes.
Right, it doesn't bloom for very long, maybe for a month.
Does the serpentine night, is that a serpentine environment needed for that? Does Archie know about this?
This is
Yeah.
Bart's version.
It's actually a Roger Rafe selection from many years ago from his property at the Cedars in Sonoma County, which is all serpentine. And that there are a number of these purple foliaged individuals up there, and Roger selected and named this one. This is here in the Botanic Garden. It's actually a plant that was given to me by Ginny Hunt, who had been growing it in a container at her garden in Watsonville. Many of you know Ginny via Seed Hunt Nursery, which is her business. And for a long time, she was at Western Hills way back. And before that, she was at the UC Santa Cruz Arboretum. So she has very extensive background in growing all kinds of unusual plants. And this was planted out in the Botanic Garden's Serpentine Bog display. So it does have a liner that does keep water, not tons of it. And that the plant has just gone crazy since we planted it. I believe it was in a 2-gallon container, and yes, you can grow them in containers for many, many years. We also sell them at many of our plant sales that the volunteers propagate the green-leafed one regularly. I think now that the Serpentine Night is doing so well, I'll probably propagate some of it also. It does go dormant in the winter, and then as it comes up, particularly Serpentine Night is really rich purple. It gets a bit greener over the summer, but it's still quite purple even when it goes dormant.
Almost looks like eucalyptus.
Yeah, in a way, it kind of has that somewhat of that look.
Do you do anything to make your water serpentine, or is just that it tolerates serpentine? And
yeah, it doesn't require serpentine at all.
Okay, Connie, I have another question for you. Do you grow any of the pitcher plants in your bog? Sarracenia or any?
No. A couple of months ago, I showed the arum lily.
Oh yeah.
And that grows in the same area.
Okay.
And it's really very nice to have an area where I don't have to worry about enough water. I don't need to, hand water, or I don't have any drip irrigation in that part of the garden. It takes care of itself.
Obviously, the plants are well suited for it, so that's good. Yeah, that's nice to have a spot where you don't have to worry about it. Okay.
Quite a resource.
Any other questions for those?
Yeah, and actually, we do grow Darlingtonias, but not with the Epipactus. the Darlingtonias are a little more exacting and want to have much more highly oxygenated, cooler water in general.
Do you have to, is that a natural area you put the Darlingtonias, or is it something artificial that you have to put together?
Artificial.
And you just pump water through it then, or what?
Yeah, it's through drip irrigation and micro emitters.
Okay, Dave, this thing is amazing. Tell us about your aloe volula.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that I originally got it at Cal Hort meeting raffle about 15 years ago. It was in a 3-inch pot, and now it's turned into this huge thing. And it flowered for the first time 3 years ago. And I found another plant locally that was flowering, collected pollen from it, and pollinated it, and got seeds from it. So
How hard was it to grow from seed?
pretty easy. The germination rate's not very high. It's only about 10 to 20%, but they're not hard to grow.
It's beautiful. It's obviously in the perfect spot. I don't think I've ever seen one bloom itself. It's gorgeous. You said it was on slightly tilted where it was growing. Does that help with keeping water off its crown, or?
Yeah, that may help with keeping the crown free of water and keeping it from rotting.
Thank you so much. I think that's really cool.
Gorgeous. Wow. Never seen one flower either.
Yeah, it's spectacular. Thank you.
I remember Ted Kipping talking about a garden somewhere in San Francisco, and it's a front yard. I remember him showing photos, and it had about 10 of them or so in front of it, up front of the house, and they were all in full bloom. So it is definitely around if you look for it. And I know there's a plant about the same size at Betsy Klepsch's garden, and it started flowering, I think, about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And once they start flowering, they just continue every year.
Dave, are you in the fog belt? I mean, up just kind of up on the fog area with on top of that Santa Cruz Mountains, I would think, yes?
No, I'm sort of in between. It's a little bit foggy, but it's nothing like the Richmond and the Sunset.
Okay. I killed mine, I'll put it that way.
We have them in some gardens in Potrero Hill where we get no fog at all, but as long as they get enough water, they do pretty well.
Isn't the spiral sometimes more erratic? That center picture especially looks very perfect. I mean, just very tight spiral.
I think it's always spiraled. I haven't seen a spiral aloe that isn't well spiraled.
Don't they go both directions?
Yes, they do go both directions, or each plant goes one direction only. I don't know if one direction is more common than another. I haven't seen enough of them to know.
Flower comes out of the side too. I think that's kind of interesting.
We've got a few that Brian donated to a public garden here in the city, in San Francisco, and but they're aloe polyphylla hybrids, but I don't know what he hybridized them with. And we just put them in last autumn, so they've just got through their first winter with us.
And are they spherically or yet?
They look like they're starting to spiral a bit, but they're still relatively young, so we're not sure really what they're going to do. And I can't remember what the parentage of them is, but yes, I'm blanking on what the other parent was. So we're going to see what happens with them.
That should be fun to see how they mature. Okay, thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. So Beryl has a colorful combination.
Well, I mostly took this picture because I need help identifying some of these plants. The Euphorbia, especially, I used to know the name. You probably can't tell because there was a single stem and I cut it last year, so I'm getting, more stems. So it might be hard for anybody to figure out what it is from that picture.
How old is it?
I'm guessing, I don't remember, maybe 3 years, but I think I cut it last year because it was just getting a leggy single stem.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll try to take pictures of it when it flowers, and it'll, I guess, be easier to figure out what it is. The Alstroemeria, I do have that particular one came up from, is just from being self-sowed. I didn't plant it there. The Hypericum, I don't know what that is.
It's a pretty one. Does it get the great yellow Hypericum flowers?
You know, I had it in a container for many years, and it had one flower, and that area doesn't get a lot of sun. It does get afternoon sun, but it's only been in the ground for maybe a year or two at the most. No flowers. So I don't know. I don't really have anything else to add, except that Ellen did a beautiful job with the arrows.
Well, I thought it looked like Cupid's arrows going all over the place, so I had to put him in there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen.
Well, I love the
job.
chartreuse and the maroon together, or what you call it, red foliage together, whatever. That always nice combination. And
Yeah, that I actually did on purpose. And the Plectranthus, I wouldn't be surprised if I got it from Sean, but I have no idea which one it is. And of course, the flowers are almost gone, so you can't really see them now.
Yeah, it shows up a little bit. Yeah, that's a nice combination, though. I like that.
Thank you.
Hey, yeah, that Hypericum is really striking, actually. Thank you, Beryl.
Thank you.
Hey, and then Robbie is on just video, so she doesn't have a microphone. So I'll read this. If you have any questions, you may want to, well, you can try to ask them. And maybe she can type in the chat any answers if you have questions on that. So anyway, so she grows up in, she moved up to Southern Oregon in Douglas County. So these are more cold adapted plants, grows a little bit different plants. So anyway, so Ginkgo biloba spring grove is an upright dwarf with dense branching on a single trunk. Gets up to 10 feet tall and approximately 5 feet wide, or 4 feet wide, depending on the conditions. It's male, so there's no fruit and no stink. Butter yellow foliage in the fall, which is so attractive to all the ginkgos and the beautiful leaves. Drought tolerant once established, which is interesting, and it's suitable for smaller gardens and containers. Anyone else grown this one? I have a dwarf one in a container as well, and it's a little bit more upright. I can't remember what its the selection is called though, but I do love it. Mine probably doesn't get as much water as it really wants though.
Sounds good. Pretty,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, and then this is an interesting one that I've never seen before. This is a spider azalea stenopetalum variety linearifolium, and I understand it is a sport off a rhododendron or an azalea. This azalea was fresh in bloom a month ago, but now has faded. It is semi-evergreen, which grows about 4 feet tall and much wider. It is hardy in zone 6 to 8, depending on, of course, the sun and shade and moisture. Robbie likes its fine texture and airy appearance, and it does not have a fragrance to her nose. I haven't seen this. I think that's really interesting foliage texture. Anybody else seen this one before?
Yeah, it's definitely around here in the East Bay and in San Francisco. I've seen it in a few gardens. I've never grown it myself. Just highly, highly unusual.
Yeah, I mean, I might have seen it, but I might not have known what it is.
Ellen, I just wanted to let you know that I haven't overwintered that up here. So I'm not too sure. It says it's semi-evergreen, and we're probably right on borderline for the winter cold, but I wanted to chance it. Also, I wanted to let was Judy Wong the one that showed the Philadelphus?
Yes.
Yeah. I brought mine up from California 3 years ago, and it's doing fine up here. It seems to like it a lot.
Oh, good. I'm glad you found a voice, Robbie.
Me too.
Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have any other comments?
New to me, very attractive.
Yeah, I was going to ask Robbie, does her Philadelphus get a lot of rain, or is it just a dry spot, or how does it do? You said it's growing well.
I grow mine in the south exposure with sun up to about noon, 1 o'clock.
It handles the rain that you get up there?
Actually, we are pretty dry in Douglas County. It's a valley. So, I mean, we get a little more rain than you in California, but not as much as, say Eugene or Salem and up north.
Where exactly, what's the largest town near you, Robbie?
We're about 50 miles south of Eugene and about 15 miles north of Roseburg, if you know what that is.
Oh.
We're about 80 miles north of Grants Pass. It's the Umpqua Valley. So we get a lot of fog from all the rivers.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm glad we can hear you now. Okay, Mark, you are on.
So this is that Caesalopenia, the yellow bird of paradise bush. The one on the right is a recent picture. The other one is an older one for a detail of one of the little petal packages, that make the spiral. I didn't find a good photo that showed the whole flower, except for the one that's kind of out of focus on the right. It's from, I think it's from South America. I don't know. It's been pretty easy. I put it against a place where it would get a lot of sun. I was worried that it wouldn't get enough heat to bloom, but it blooms fine. It bounces off of this little plexiglass greenhouse south facing, so it gets pretty good amount of heat, but it also dies back pretty. I mean, the tips they look very finished by the, as soon as it gets cold, it looks kind of dead, but it comes back.
So it goes dormant in the wintertime?
Yeah, well, kind of. It looks ratty in the wintertime. Yeah.
Nice, pretty fine foliage, though. It's like nice.
Yeah, not too bad. You don't notice that as much, but boy, you can't miss those stamens, can you?
No. Hummingbirds go for it?
I can't say that I remember seeing them buzz around there. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't recall.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely a hummingbird plant, and it does, it has escaped in parts of California. Not around here, more in the San Joaquin Valley and hotter areas. It is a very durable, almost unkillable plant, especially with drought. It'll take extreme drought.
Well, that'll explain my success with it then.
Well, except I'm surprised it does so well for you so near the bay.
Right, yeah. I mean, the thing about the sun and the heat, you would think that it would want more, right? Same here. Yeah. Oh, and this is cordyline stricta. Oh, and it's not stricta, it's fruticosa. I just was checking it online and found a different source. I'd been reading it as cordyline stricta soledad, but it's not. It's fruticosa, apparently.
Okay. Fruticosa?
Yeah. So sorry about that. I gave you the wrong information. But, and it's I hadn't noticed blooms on it before. I've had it for a long time in a kind of a pot set down in a deck for a while, kind of a metal thing I had made up, very restricted. Now it's in the ground out front, and I just happened to notice there are a few blooms, between the leaves. It's got a lot of leaves. They get pretty high.
How tall is it?
I It says 6, but mine is at least 8 feet tall. The ones that are sticking up higher, the lower blooming one is probably 5, 6 feet, right in that range. I'm halfway debating whether I shouldn't cut some of the taller ones away and let some of the younger ones. It's kind of bushy down below. I think it might look better to let it refresh with new foliage.
Mm. Is it fragrant? Flowers fragrant?
Well, my nose is not a very good judge of that, but along with most flowers, no, for me. Yeah.
Well, those tops will root very easily if you cut them off.
Oh, will he? Oh, good to know.
Good point. You can have a bushier bottom on that then.
You know, I hadn't seen this in any gardens around here until you took us to McGregor's garden in Martinez, and he had that out. It surprised me. Yeah. Oh, and then this is I picked up at Annie's. This is the one I planted last year. I guess it's just blooming its head off now, and I guess this would be an example of a fog. It's from Madeira. So, I mean, I'm thinking Canary Islands and Madeira would probably be examples of places where plants are adapted to the fog and, you know, kind of like gentle conditions. Or
it looks happy. How tall is it?
Maybe 3 feet.
Oh, okay.
I hear 4 feet by 4 feet, and it might, and apparently it should live over. It's got a little competition, you know. There's a lot of things. I mean, I often will overplant and then declare winners once they become apparent. But this one's holding its own rather nicely in the second year, so I probably will give it the space.
The flowers look a little furry. Is that correct?
I don't know. You know, you can't hardly see any foliage, but the foliage is.
No, I'm talking the flowers. Sorry.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. Don't they look a little bit like lobelia or like salvia flowers? I mean, probably not to anybody who's used to really, you know, distinguishing one from the other, but it looks vaguely like that to me. It sure is just going nuts though.
Yeah, they're also somewhat reminiscent with those really exerted stamens of some trichostomas, or woolly blue curls. I've grown this plant, and it's always been one of my favorites. I currently do not have one. They can get up to around 4 or 5 feet in height. Yeah. I really like the foliage. It's deeply crenate margins. And I always found that it seeded around for me limitedly. In Southern California, a lot more. And again, no problem with hardiness any of the places that I've lived, and that includes Canyon up here, which got quite cold. So again, a wonderful, wonderful plant.
And I'm noticing several tucariums are some pretty nice plants, and I like they kind of have a pattern in the way the foliage grows. It kind of look like pagodas or something, the way they're kind of you know, stacked up. This was more noticeably like that before the flowers came out. Now you can't really see what's going on down below there now. Would you cut it back after blooming?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You can cut it back fairly hard and it'll come back well.
Good.
Just always make sure that there's some live stuff around, like most mints or mint family that are shrubby.
Okay, good. Oh, and that's the Streptosolon Jamesonii, the marmalade bush. This one has been in the garden for a long time there, and it's just it's growing down below the rail of this corner deck, which is up like mid-height, a few feet up off the ground. And I'm not always generous with, you know, feeding plants, but this last winter I did, and I think it's rewarding me.
Wow.
I've always liked the way the flowers go
growing
through.
it.
Yeah, it goes through these color changes where I'm not really sure what it starts out as. If it starts off yellow, goes orange, and then kind of darker orange red. But I like the 3 different colors.
So is this a fog loving plant, you think?
Let's see. This is South America again, isn't it?
I think you're right.
Yeah. It's Solanaceae, which was surprising to me. I just was looking at that tonight. But I mean, New World kind of fits, but it just doesn't look like other ones to my eye. I mean, I guess I'm used to seeing a lot of purple.
Okay, Mr. Bart, you're up.
Well, there's two plants that are flowering at the garden right now. The Salvia chianopeplica is endemic to Baja California. It's not super coastal, and it's more in the kind of at the margins of the of Chaparral. It is just an outstanding bloomer for us here at the Botanic Garden. When I grew this in Southern California, it bloomed early and then that was it. But up here, it can start as early as March and still look like this right now, today. A very, very long season. You can also see that the verticillasters of flowers are huge, and the individual flowers are quite large also. Very popular with the pipevine swallowtail butterflies. When they're out in numbers, this and other salvias are among their favorite plants here at the Botanic Garden to nectar on. The plant also doesn't get wildly too big. Those that we had at Rancho Santa Ana were almost always under 3 feet. I'd say these are a little bit taller than that and probably up to around 4 feet. Maybe the tops of the spikes definitely higher, but the plants themselves are planted on a bit of a mound, so here in the garden they look taller than they really are. And then on the right, we grow many lilies at the Botanic Garden and have for a long time, probably since Wayne Roderick was the director here, because he was so interested in our native lilies and geophytes in general. Lilium Kalogii is a little bit more exacting in what it wants and doesn't want. In the wild, it's usually found in chaparral zones, frequently growing out of or emerging out of the tops of manzanita shrubs. Very, very fragrant, and they can be different shades of pink. We have some very dark ones here at the garden. Some of them have yellow to orange bands on the petals. And again, a wonderful plant. Here at the garden, we have a couple of really big ones that can have up to about 15 flowers on them, but the majority of them tend to have from 1 to 3.
So they're not in forests?
No, not a forest one. Again, we grow them out in the open, but again, in the wild, you usually, like I said, see them.
Chaparral areas.
Yeah, but it's northern, semi-coastal chaparral, so it's not hot, dry chaparral, and they're always up at higher elevations where they'll get more water, but they're never, ever in water or adjacent to water. They and the ones that do best in the garden are on slopes. We do have it in containers also.
Is that salvia one that you put on up for sale sometimes?
Yes, and that frequently it is at our plant sales, and that people don't realize which one it is because it is such a good grower and great performer that it really is one of the outstanding ones for your garden.
And you don't think it's one likely to escape and take over? Or maybe that would be a good thing.
No, I've never had any spontaneous seedlings of it, either down south or up here.
Thank you.
Then just a couple of other lilies. On the left is the Columbiana, is the first of the lilies generally to come into bloom here. They're usually yellow to orange in color and have black dots on them, usually around the centers. Again, it's a woodland plant. You see it very commonly along the freeway, the 101 freeway, as you go between Arcata and Crescent City. The nearer you get to Crescent City, the more and more of them there are. And they're just sticking out into the road, but you can't ever stop to look at them because 101's only 2 lanes and no place to park. That's
Run over them otherwise.
Yeah, that's probably why the lilies are still there. No one can pick them. And then on the right is Lilium Humboldtii oscillatum, the Southern California form. It is found from about the transverse ranges through the peninsular ranges and down into one location in Baja California. This is the easiest lily to grow for most people. It seeds around here in our garden. It actually does natural hybrids, which we'll see in a minute. It's oscillatum because of those spots in the upper part of the tepals. You can see they have dark centers and then sort of a purplish orange around them. And that's oscillated. It's not a lily that requires a lot of water. Unlike leopard lily, pardalinum needs regular water, but Humboldtii oscillatum can get by with infrequent watering once it's established. How you can tell if you have Humboldtii versus hybrids, typically Humboldtii will just do a single stem or rarely 2 and very rarely 3 from the same bulb or clump. The stem will just be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. A single stem can have upward of 50 flowers on it. I think I'd sent one to you, Ellen, that might have had 30 flowers on it. But anyway, if they're really clumped and all coming from one mass of bulbs, it almost for sure is a hybrid.
So is that a hybrid or is that several plants or what's that one?
That's actually a bunch of different plants. You can see they're well spaced from one another from where they come out of the ground. Here are some nice perennials, Silene californica on the left and Aquilegia formosa. And you can see the Aquilegia is in the same place as the Epipactis serpentine night. So they do get extra water. But you can also see how big those columbines can get in those kind of conditions. Those Aquilegias are almost 5 feet tall. And they've been blooming for a little while, as you can see, because the very topmost things are already seed heads that are forming, and yet they'll be in bloom for a long time still. The Silene californica is oftentimes thought of as a rock garden type plant, but really it's just the best forms of it are very vigorous perennials. They don't go 100% dormant. They can, but most of ours don't. They just die back some and you can cut them back and then they'll do this. This is actually year 3, I believe, on the plant on the left in our Klamath Shasta part of the garden. We have a lot of these things because I did a big seed collection a few years ago, and they keep getting planted out in more and more places. Hummingbird pollinated, really easy to grow, just like the columbine, except it doesn't need as much water.
So showy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing what a little bit of water will do, huh?
Yes, it is.
Aquilegias.
Okay, then 2 buckwheats. The top one is one I'd always wanted to grow, Ariagnum grande variety Timorum from San Nicolas Island. It's federally listed and it's difficult to get seeds. The head of our gardeners, Liz Bittner, the Botanic Garden supervisor, who's responsible for the Channel Island section, was able to have some given to her by the National Park Service folks. And it has been a remarkable plant. You can see actually, Ellen, you can probably show them on the left-hand image, on the gravel in the front.
Oh, yes, the seedlings.
Right through where you had the thing. There's all kinds of little seedlings of them coming up. All of those little gray things. Yep, right there.
I didn't know.
They're self-seeded from the year before. This is how big the plant has gotten in, I believe this is now year 3 or 2, I forget which. And that we were able to grow a whole lot of them from seed, but then there's been a reinterpretation of the State's Endangered Species Act, and that if you didn't have the plant before it was listed, you can't sell it. So even though we have a bunch of these, we may not be able to sell any of them, which would be quite maddening because it's quite a beautiful plant.
What's the idea behind that law? Because they're afraid people are going to dig them up, and
I'm not sure because it never had been the case before.
You think they want it distributed?
You would think so, and especially something that's an island endemic like that. It's not like people are going to go out there and collect it because it's not an island you can get to very easily at all. Mm-hmm. And that it is quite ornamental. I was surprised that they got through the winter without any problem whatsoever, because as many of you know, San Nicolas is one of the lower islands and it's predominantly sand and coastal. And I thought it might actually be killed by frost, but nope, didn't seem to phase it at all. Those are actually different individual plants in those 3 images. It's not all the same plant. Then below is another state and at least state listed and probably federally listed also, buckwheat that's been in horticulture though for decades and decades and decades. Eriogonum crocatum, the so-called saffron buckwheat, has the beautiful gray-white foliage. The middle image, you see the buds, which are kind of rust-colored, and then a young plant on the right in full bloom, and then the one on the left, a very old, mature plant that's about 2.5 feet tall, maybe 3 feet or so wide. The plants get much larger here than they do in the wild. This is only found in the Santa Monica Mountains at the north end on volcanics. But again, it's been in cultivation for probably close to a century. I believe it was brought into cultivation by Theodore Payne, and certainly when Saratoga Horticultural Foundation was active early on, it was one of the plants that they were pushing for Bay Area gardens, and it is very well adapted here. Both of these plants want full sun. I'm surprised that the Grande Timorum is coming up so freely in our paths, which are fairly clayey, but with rock on top. So I'm thinking even heavy soils may not phase Grande Timorum. Real heavy wet soils are not favorable for Eriogonum crocatum.
Next month, send me your plants. Sunday, July 18th. Thank you all for sharing those. And then next month, we have Tamar Galstian, who is going to be speaking about Armenia. And evidently Armenia is in the border of 2 different ecosystems, the Caucasian and the Irano-Turanian. And I think it should be really interesting. And she does botanical tours, so she knows where they're all at, all the cool stuff is. So, okay,
Yeah.
good night.
Good night.
Happy summer.